Rachel Monroe was supposed to be Claire Myers' best friend, her closest confidant, the one person she trusted most. But just 3 weeks after Claire's husband, Daniel, left her to be with Rachel, Claire was found buried in her own backyard, wrapped in a tarp, hidden behind the garden shed, and betrayed by the two people she never thought would turn on her. Lakeside Grove was the kind of neighborhood where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. Rows of identical houses with white shutters and wraparound porches lined the smooth, quiet streets. Lawns were always freshly mowed, cars washed on Saturday mornings, and children rode their bikes until dusk without a care in the world. If you stood on any corner long enough, someone would wave to you. It was the kind of place that people moved to for safety, predictability, and a sense of order. But underneath the painted fences and friendly smiles, things weren't always what they seemed. Daniel and Claire Myers lived in a 2-story colonial house at the end of Birchwood Lane. Their home looked like it came straight out of a catalog, potted. Hydrangeas by the door, a tire swing hanging from the oak tree, a red front door that Claire insisted brought positive energy. They had lived there for 7 years, having moved in not long after Daniel got promoted at his firm. From the outside looking in, they were the perfect couple. High school sweethearts who had built a life together from scratch. Claire, soft-spoken and warm, worked part-time at the local bookstore and volunteered at the community garden. Daniel, confident and sharp, was a financial advisor with an easy smile and a reputation for being charming, if a little self-centered. Claire was known in the neighborhood as the one who always remembered birthdays. She would drop off fresh cookies at a new neighbor's house or stop by with flowers for someone going through a hard time. She had a quiet presence, but people noticed her. She had a way of making others feel important without ever making herself the center of attention. That role, many believed, belonged to Rachel Monroe, Claire's best friend. Rachel was almost the opposite of Claire. She was loud, spontaneous, and had a laugh that turned heads. She had a flair for dramatics, often changing her hair color, or getting into some sort of minor scandal that became neighborhood gossip. But she was also fiercely loyal to Claire. They had met in college and remained inseparable ever since. Rachel had no family in town, and Claire often said Rachel was the sister she never had. Rachel was single and lived just a few blocks away. She was a regular fixture at the Myers household, often seen on the front porch with a glass of wine in hand or helping Claire replant her flower beds in the spring. The neighbors joked that the three of them were like a sitcom trio. Claire the calm one, Rachel the wild one, and Daniel the slightly annoyed straight man who tolerated their antics. With a smirk, no one knows exactly when things changed. Some said they noticed Daniel and Rachel getting too close at barbecues. Others claimed Rachel started showing up when Claire wasn't home. But these were only whispers, nothing more. After all, who would betray someone like Claire? Then, seemingly, out of nowhere, Claire filed for divorce. It was a Thursday morning in early spring, and the news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. No one saw it coming. There had been no loud arguments, no visible signs of strain. Just a woman quietly walking into the county courthouse and signing papers that would end 11 years of marriage. Daniel moved out the next day, not to a temporary place or a hotel, but into Rachel's house. That same night, the neighbors were stunned. At first, people tried to come up with reasonable explanations. Maybe it had been going on for longer than anyone knew. Maybe Claire had found out something devastating. Or maybe she had simply had enough of being taken for granted. But no one could say for sure, and Claire wasn't talking. She stopped attending book club, stopped showing up at the community garden, and barely answered her phone. A few friends tried to check on her. She said she was fine, just taking some time to process. But her eyes were dull, her voice thinner than usual. She looked like someone who had been quietly broken. Meanwhile, Daniel and Rachel acted like nothing was wrong. They were seen laughing on walks, eating dinner on Rachel's porch, even leaving town for a weekend getaway just 2 weeks after the divorce was filed. It was as if they had been waiting for Claire to step aside so they could finally be together, out in the open. Some neighbors crossed the street when they saw them. Others were more vocal, calls for respect, accusations of betrayal. But Daniel seemed unfazed, and Rachel just smiled through it all. 3 weeks after Daniel left Claire for Rachel, a neighbor's dog began digging near the back fence of Claire's yard. The Harringtons, who lived next door, were hosting a birthday party for their youngest child. The dog, a playful Labrador named Scout, had squeezed through a loose slat in the fence and found something under a patch of soft earth. At first, they thought it was a dead animal, but then they saw hair, human hair, long, blonde. The police were called immediately. Yellow tape went up within the hour. Forensics teams combed through Claire's backyard, methodically digging through the soil behind the tool shed. By sundown, the entire neighborhood had gathered in hushed circles, watching from porches and sidewalks, and by nightfall, the body was confirmed to be Claire Myers. She had been missing for 5 days, but no one had reported it. Friends had assumed she was lying low or visiting family. After all, wouldn't someone say something if Claire Myers, of all people, had disappeared? But she hadn't gone anywhere. She had been right there all along, in the yard of the home she once loved. The home she had built with the man who had promised her forever, and someone had buried her like a secret. The perfect suburban story had just shattered, and everyone was asking the same question. Who could do something like this to Claire? The discovery of Claire Myers's body sent shockwaves through Lakeside Grove. For a neighborhood that prided itself on being safe and peaceful, the realization that someone had been killed and buried right in their midst was impossible to comprehend. Overnight, the street that once echoed with laughter and the sound of sprinklers became a crime scene swarming with officers, crime scene tape, and flashing lights. The community, still grappling with the scandal of Claire's divorce, now found itself at the center of a murder investigation. Detectives arrived within minutes of the 911 call made by the Harringtons. Their dog, Scout, had been the one to uncover the remains, and the discovery had happened in broad daylight during a child's birthday party. Balloons still floated in the air as officers secured the scene, asking neighbors to return to their homes. Children were ushered inside as whispers turned to quiet sobs. No one could believe it. Not Claire. Not here. The forensics team got to work quickly. The area behind the shed was cordoned off and lit up with floodlights as the sun began to set. Crime scene photographers snapped pictures of every inch of the scene, capturing the disturbed soil, the partial remains, and the nearby gardening tools still resting against the shed wall. One of them, a metal rake, was stained with what looked like dried blood. Investigators noted it immediately and collected it for testing. Claire's body had been buried in a shallow grave, barely a foot beneath the surface. It was clear that whoever had done it hadn't spent much time trying to conceal it. Her body was wrapped in a plastic tarp, loosely folded, as if someone had been in a hurry. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of restraint, just a single, fatal blow to the back of the head. The medical examiner arrived shortly after and confirmed what many had already feared. The woman was indeed Claire Myers. Her purse and phone were found inside the house, untouched. Her car was parked in the driveway, keys still inside. The front door had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. Claire had never left her home that night. She had been killed on her own property, then hastily buried like garbage in her own backyard. The timeline became a priority. According to the examiner's preliminary report, she had likely died 5 days prior, just a few days after Daniel moved out and into Rachel Monroe's home. That timing was significant, too close, too suspicious. Investigators began to piece together the days leading up to her death. Claire hadn't been seen much since the divorce papers were filed. A few friends had tried to reach out, but she hadn't returned calls or messages. They assumed she was grieving or needed space. Some had even chalked it up to embarrassment. No one had any reason to believe she was in danger. But the more detectives dug, the more questions they uncovered. Why hadn't anyone noticed her missing sooner? Why hadn't her closest friends, or even her estranged husband, checked in on her? And who would have had both the motive and opportunity to commit such a brutal act? Suspicion immediately turned to the two people whose lives had most recently collided with Claire's, Daniel Myers and Rachel Monroe. Investigators noted the glaring coincidence that Daniel had left Claire for Rachel only 3 weeks before: the murder. It didn't help that Rachel had practically moved into the Myers home before Daniel's boxes were even packed. The neighborhood gossip, which had once been harmless, was now the basis for motive. The betrayal, the lies, the suddenness of the relationship, all of it pointed toward something much darker than a simple affair. Detectives visited Daniel at Rachel's house the following morning. He was calm, cooperative, and even offered condolences. He claimed to have had no contact with Claire in the days leading up to her death. He said she had been devastated by the divorce but had refused to speak with him. He admitted the situation with Rachel had been messy, but insisted he had never intended for things to end the way they had. He swore he hadn't seen Claire since the day he left. Rachel told a similar story. She said she had been trying to support Daniel through a difficult time, and had only become involved with him after the marriage had already fallen apart. She denied ever being at Claire's house since the breakup and claimed she had no reason to hurt her. "Claire was my best friend," she told police. "We were like family." But both Daniel and Rachel were rattled when detectives asked for alibis. On the night Claire was believed to have died, Daniel said he had been home, asleep next to Rachel. Rachel confirmed his story, but neither of them had any proof. No neighbors had seen them. No cameras had picked them up. Their phones had been inactive that night. It was a weak alibi at best. Forensic evidence from the crime scene began to come back from the lab. The rake found near the shed did test positive for blood, and the DNA was confirmed to be Claire's. A fingerprint on the handle was partial and inconclusive, but the soil beneath her nails contained trace amounts of concrete dust, something not found anywhere else on her property. Investigators believed she had struggled briefly, perhaps crawling or trying to get away, before being struck. Detectives began canvassing the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual that week. One elderly neighbor recalled hearing something in the middle of the night, what she thought was an animal rustling near the shed. She hadn't looked outside, assuming it was just a raccoon. Another neighbor mentioned seeing Rachel walking late at night a few days earlier, heading toward Birchwood Lane. At the time, it hadn't seemed odd. Rachel often went for walks, but now it took on a new significance. In addition to physical evidence, police obtained Claire's phone and computer. Her last text message had been sent the morning before she died. It was to a friend, simply saying, "I think I finally understand." She never explained what she meant. Her internet history revealed searches for things like how to retrieve deleted messages and how to tell if someone is lying. It seemed Claire had been suspicious, perhaps even fearful. But it was what detectives found in her cloud storage that changed everything. A single voice recording, time-stamped and uploaded just hours before she died. The file was poor in quality, but clear enough to make out a heated argument between two voices, a man and a woman. The woman sounded emotional, desperate. The man was trying to calm her down. What stood out was one chilling line. "She doesn't know what we did." Who was she, and what had they done? Investigators now had a motive, a suspicious timeline, and a set of potential suspects whose stories no longer matched the evidence. What had started as a shocking discovery was now spiraling into something much more sinister, a calculated act, possibly planned, possibly covered up. The quiet, clean-cut world of Lakeside Grove was unraveling fast. The investigation took a darker and more complex turn when detectives gained access to Claire Meyer's phone records and digital data. What they found revealed a woman who had been deeply suspicious and possibly scared in the days leading up to her death. The image of Claire as a passive, heartbroken ex-wife began to shift. She had been watching, listening, and documenting more than anyone realized. The first clue came from her call logs. 16 calls from a blocked number had come in over the span of just 4 days before her death. Claire had answered only one. That conversation had lasted a mere 19 seconds. Investigators couldn't determine exactly what was said, but the frequency of the calls indicated someone was desperately trying to reach her. Friends confirmed that Claire rarely answered unknown numbers, and when she did, it was usually out of concern, not curiosity. Police then turned to her internet activity, where more red flags appeared. In the final week of her life, Claire had searched phrases such as how to tell if someone is lying, how to track a phone without them, knowing, and can deleted text messages be recovered. These weren't the casual searches of someone trying to move on from a breakup. These were the actions of a person actively seeking the truth, someone who believed they were being deceived. Claire's laptop provided further insight. Hidden in a password-protected folder labeled Garden Receipts was a set of files that detectives believed she had compiled in secret. One document contained screenshots of text messages between Daniel and Rachel, messages that had been sent long before the divorce. The tone of the messages was intimate and sometimes panicked. In one, Rachel had written, "She can't find out. Not like this." In another, Daniel replied, "I'll handle it. Just stay calm." The dates on these messages stretched back nearly 3 months, long before the divorce was even mentioned. This suggested the affair had been ongoing for some time and likely not the product of a failing marriage, as Daniel had claimed. Claire had somehow accessed the messages, possibly by using Daniel's old tablet, which he had left behind when he moved out. Detectives found the device still logged into a shared cloud account. More than that, Claire had created an audio recording. It was time-stamped the night before she was last seen alive and automatically uploaded to her cloud storage, possibly as a safety measure. The recording itself was just under 4 minutes long, muffled and slightly distorted, but its content was alarming. 2 voices argued, Daniel and Rachel. Rachel sounded panicked, her words rapid and clipped. She accused Daniel of still being in love with her and said she was tired of being the secret. Daniel's voice was harder to hear, but he kept repeating that she doesn't know anything. At one point, Rachel shouted, "Then why is she recording us?" followed by a loud crashing sound, like something being knocked over. The recording cut off seconds later. Claire had captured, it all. She had likely been nearby, listening in secret, possibly using a recording app on her phone or tablet. Police now had motive and premeditation. They believed Claire had confronted the two with evidence of their betrayal and possibly threatened to expose them. But they also considered a new theory. What if Claire had learned something even more damaging? Something beyond the affair? To dig deeper, detectives interviewed Rachel's ex-husband, Anthony Monroe. He and Rachel had divorced nearly 2 years earlier, and according to him, their relationship had ended bitterly. They hadn't spoken in over a year, but when told that Claire had named him as the sole beneficiary on her life insurance policy, his reaction was one of genuine shock. He had no idea. He had never spoken to Claire about money, much less anything involving insurance. Investigators traced the insurance policy update to a change made 2 weeks before Claire's death. The application had been filled out online using Claire's email, address, and login credentials. But handwriting experts later determined that the digital signature didn't match Claire's usual style. They also found IP address data that linked the policy update to a device located at Rachel's house. Detectives concluded that Rachel had used Claire's personal information to access and modify the insurance account. The plan, it seemed, was to name Anthony as the beneficiary, someone far removed from the situation, so that she or Daniel could possibly manipulate or coerce him into cashing out the policy later. The tactic was clever in its distance and deflection, but now it looked like one of many steps taken to quietly erase Claire from the picture. The theory that began to form was chilling. Claire had uncovered the affair. She had tracked the messages, collected evidence, and possibly confronted Daniel and Rachel. Then she had discovered the forged insurance update. That, detectives believed, was the breaking point. She had realized someone close to her was planning something bigger than betrayal, something criminal. And she had begun documenting everything. A final disturbing discovery came from Claire's Notes app on her phone. One unfinished entry read, "If anything happens to me, look at Daniel and Rachel. I'm not paranoid. I know what I saw. I know what they're capable of." That message never got sent. With this mounting evidence, investigators requested a warrant to seize devices from both Rachel and Daniel's home. Daniel's phone had been recently reset to factory settings. Rachel's laptop had its hard drive wiped clean. But digital, forensics managed to recover fragments of deleted files from Rachel's device, including a photo of Claire's insurance policy and a series of screenshots of messages between Claire and a friend. One message from Claire read, "I think I've made a huge mistake. I let them get too close. I don't know who I can trust." The image of Rachel Monroe, the loyal best friend, was shattered completely. She had lied to police, destroyed evidence, and been caught on tape in a confrontation that took place the night before Claire was killed. Daniel, while more reserved and composed, was now under intense scrutiny for what he may have known, or done, leading up to Claire's death. The once simple case of a woman found buried in her backyard had evolved into something far more tangled. It wasn't just a love triangle gone wrong. It was deception layered upon deception. And for the investigators now piecing together Claire's final days, one thing was becoming clear. Claire had seen it coming. She had tried to protect herself. But she had underestimated just how far someone would go to silence her. In the days following the discovery of Claire's body, detectives returned again and again to the scene of the crime. Something about the backyard still didn't sit right. It was too quiet, too ordinary, almost sterile, like someone had carefully scrubbed away the truth. The garden tools were neatly arranged against the shed, the flower beds freshly turned, and even the small bird feeder had been recently refilled. It didn't look like the site of a murder. It looked manicured, intentional. While retracing the perimeter for any missed clues, one of the forensic officers spotted an old, weathered security camera tucked just under the roof of the shed. It was partially hidden behind a vine and aimed at the back corner of the yard. At first, it didn't seem like it was working. There were cobwebs on the lens, and the casing was cracked from years of sun and rain. Still, the officer decided to check. The camera had no wireless connection, but it had a built-in SD card. When investigators inserted the card into a computer, they found weeks of footage. Much of it was mundane. Birds hopping along the fence, Claire watering her flowers, the occasional squirrel darting through the grass. But then they found something more troubling. On the night Claire was believed to have been killed, the camera had recorded movement at 1:47 a.m. The grainy footage showed a figure entering the backyard from the side gate. The person moved cautiously, pausing every few steps, looking around, as if trying to avoid being seen. They carried something long in their right hand, what appeared to be a gardening tool, possibly a shovel or rake. The figure was dressed in dark clothing and wore a hoodie pulled up over their head, concealing most of their features. The quality of the footage was too poor for facial recognition, but the movement, the way the person walked, and one small detail stood out, a crescent moon tattoo on the right wrist. Detectives knew who had that tattoo. Rachel Monroe. They had seen it many times before, at neighborhood gatherings, in social media photos, even during her interviews. It was distinctive, located just above the joint of her wrist, and easy to miss unless you were looking for it. In the video, as the figure turned slightly under the motion light near the shed, the tattoo caught the camera's lens for just a moment. The figure stayed in the yard for nearly 10 minutes. Then they left, no longer carrying the tool they had brought in. The gate was pulled shut, and the yard fell still again. Rachel had told police she had not gone near Claire's house in the weeks since the separation. She claimed to have been home with Daniel the entire night Claire was believed to have died. But now there was visual evidence placing someone with her exact tattoo, walking like her, in Claire's yard at the very time of the murder. Still, Rachel denied everything. When presented with the footage, she insisted the person in the video wasn't her. She said the tattoo was a common design and that it could have been anyone. She stuck to her original alibi, that she was home asleep next to Daniel. But that story was unraveling fast. Investigators then reviewed nearby security footage from surrounding houses. The Jensen family, who lived 2 doors down from Claire, had a smart doorbell camera that picked up motion on their walkway. At 1:30 a.m., just 17 minutes before the backyard footage, the doorbell camera captured a woman walking past in the direction of Claire's home. She wore a dark hoodie, walked briskly, and held something in her right hand. Though her face was obscured, her build, posture, and pace closely matched Rachel's. Faced with 2 separate video sources, detectives now had a timeline. Rachel had left her home around 1:30 a.m., walked down Birchwood Lane toward Claire's house, entered the backyard at 1:47 a.m., and remained there for 10 minutes. Claire's estimated time of death was between 1:30 and 2 a.m. to strengthen. The case, forensics returned to the backyard to examine the gate latch and shed door for any prints or trace evidence. While most surfaces had been wiped clean, they found a partial palm print on the inside of the shed door, later confirmed to be Rachel's. Additionally, a small smudge of soil on the back of the shed, tested against dirt from Rachel's shoes, which had been collected as evidence during her initial interview, was a match. The soil was unique to Claire's backyard because of a fertilizer blend she had ordered only days before. Meanwhile, the tension between Rachel and Daniel was growing. Daniel, who had remained relatively composed throughout the investigation, was starting to distance himself. His statements became more cautious. He began using phrases like, "I can't speak for her," and "we weren't together that night the entire time." He claimed he had fallen asleep early and didn't know if Rachel had left the house while he slept. Rachel, feeling the pressure, began shifting her tone too. She hinted to police that perhaps Daniel had framed her. She suggested that he had more access to Claire's passwords and devices than she did, and even went so far as to say maybe this was his plan all along. But the evidence pointed in a different direction. The turning point came when detectives uncovered browser history from Rachel's laptop before it had been wiped. Recovered fragments showed she had searched for how to reset security cameras without a password and how to delete security footage from SD cards. The searches were conducted the day before Claire was killed. Whether Rachel knew about the shed camera or not, she had clearly been preparing to cover her tracks. Detectives now believed Rachel had gone to Claire's house late that night to confront her, possibly about the evidence Claire had gathered. They theorized that the argument had turned violent, that Rachel had brought the tool to intimidate her, and in a moment of rage or fear, used it to kill her. Then, under the cover of darkness, she dragged Claire's body to the edge of the yard and hastily buried her. The plastic tarp found around the body had been traced back to a roll found in Rachel's garage. Claire had likely been asleep when Rachel arrived. There were no signs of a break-in, suggesting Claire may have let her in voluntarily, or that she never had the chance to react. The fatal injury, a sharp blow to the back of the head, supported the theory that the attack had come suddenly. The community, once stunned, now grew angrier. People who had once defended Rachel and Daniel now turned away when they passed on the street. Rachel stopped leaving her house. Daniel began working remotely and avoided public places entirely. The illusion of innocence had been shattered. With video surveillance, forensic matches, and digital evidence pointing squarely at Rachel, investigators were preparing to make an arrest. The only remaining question was whether Daniel had helped her before or after the fact. But at this stage, all roads led to Rachel. Claire's backyard, once a place of flowers and quiet afternoons, had become the scene of a secret unraveled. The camera she had forgotten about, or perhaps left there intentionally, had done what she couldn't. It told the truth. The final chapter in the case of Claire Myers brought more questions than answers. Just as investigators prepared to arrest Rachel Monroe for Claire's murder, a new lead emerged, one that shifted the narrative once again and pulled Daniel Myers back into the spotlight. It was a discovery made not by police, but by Claire's sister, Megan, who had flown in from Oregon after hearing the devastating news. She had been staying at Claire's house during the investigation, helping sort through her belongings. In one of Claire's desk drawers, Megan found a file folder labeled Private. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, and a handwritten note that would cast a long shadow over everything. The emails were between Claire and her attorney, dated just 2 weeks before her death. In them, Claire discussed her suspicion that someone had been accessing her financial records without permission. She mentioned unexplained activity on her bank account and the sudden, unauthorized change to her life insurance policy. One line in particular caught the detective's attention. "If anything happens to me, I want it documented that Daniel and Rachel have both had access to my computer and passwords. I don't feel safe." This wasn't a woman simply grieving a failed marriage. This was someone who believed her life was in danger and was trying, in her own quiet way, to leave a trail. It was becoming clear that Claire's final days were filled with fear, confusion, and a growing realization that the people closest to her had turned against her. The life insurance policy had been a key piece of the puzzle, But now, with further investigation, detectives found something even more disturbing. The policy, originally naming Daniel as the beneficiary, had been changed to Rachel's ex-husband, Anthony Monroe, just as previously discovered. But hidden in the details was a clause triggered only if Claire's death was deemed accidental or natural. If her death was ruled a homicide, the policy would be frozen indefinitely. Someone had gone to great lengths to make it look like Claire had simply disappeared or died from unrelated causes. Rachel's fingerprint was found on the page confirming the policy change, which had been printed and signed using Claire's name. Though she claimed Claire had asked for help updating her finances, handwriting analysis proved otherwise. The signature had been traced, literally. Light pencil markings underneath suggested Rachel had used a printed copy of Claire's real signature as a guide. At this point, the evidence against Rachel was overwhelming. The late-night visit to Claire's yard, the forged policy documents, the deleted digital records, the matching soil on her shoes, and the damning security footage. She was arrested at her home in the early morning hours of a Tuesday in June. She didn't resist, but she didn't say a word either. As police led her away in handcuffs, Daniel stood at the doorway, expressionless. At first, Daniel continued to claim he had no involvement. He said Rachel had never told him what she was planning, that he had no idea Claire was in danger, and that he had never seen the footage or heard the recording Claire had made. But a search of his personal laptop revealed he had, in fact, logged into Claire's email weeks before her death and viewed the very emails she had exchanged with her attorney. Worse, investigators found fragments of a deleted message draft in which Daniel had attempted to respond from Claire's email address, posing as her to stop the attorney from filing anything official. When confronted with this, Daniel finally admitted to accessing Claire's files, but insisted he had done it to protect himself. He claimed Rachel had pressured him to help her cover up the policy change and that he was scared of her. He painted himself as a man caught in a situation spiraling out of control. But prosecutors weren't convinced. They believed Daniel had been involved from the beginning, not necessarily in the act of murder, but in creating the conditions that allowed it to happen. He had left Claire vulnerable, helped conceal digital evidence, and remained silent when he knew something was terribly wrong. Aiding and abetting, obstruction, conspiracy. Daniel was arrested just 5 days after Rachel. The news exploded across media outlets. Lakeside Grove love triangle turns deadly. Husband and girlfriend charged in wife's backyard murder. A story that had begun in whispers and neighborhood gossip had now become a national spectacle. As the trial neared, the prosecution prepared a case built around motive, manipulation, and the calculated erasure of a woman who stood in the way. They argued that Rachel, driven by jealousy and financial greed, had murdered Claire. They painted Daniel as the enabler, the man who may not have swung the weapon, but who had helped plan the deception, benefiting from the outcome. Rachel's defense claimed she had acted in a moment of fear, saying Claire had attacked her first. They tried to portray the murder as an act of self-defense, but the evidence didn't support that. Claire's body had been buried, not reported. The rake had been wiped clean, not left at the scene. Her phone and diary were missing, later found hidden in Rachel's garage. These were not the actions of someone afraid. They were the signs of someone trying to make a body disappear. Daniel's defense attempted to separate him entirely from the act. His lawyers argued that he had made bad choices, yes, helping Rachel access accounts, failing to alert police, but he hadn't known she would go that far. He had been manipulated, they said, a passive participant caught in a web of lies, but the jury didn't see it that way. After a lengthy trial, Rachel Monroe was found guilty of first-degree murder, fraud, and tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Daniel Myers was found guilty of conspiracy and obstruction. He received a sentence of 20 years, with the possibility of parole after 12. In the courtroom, Claire's sister read a statement on behalf of the family. She described Claire as kind, thoughtful, and deeply trusting. A woman who gave people the benefit of the doubt until it cost her everything. She said, "Claire's story is not just one of betrayal, but of strength. Even in her final days, she tried to protect herself. She left behind the truth, and in the end, that truth brought justice." Lakeside Grove has never been the same. The Myers house was sold quietly, its new owners unaware of what happened there until after they moved in. The shed, where the security camera had been found, was torn down. The garden is gone now, replaced by gravel and drought-resistant plants. A place of beauty transformed by tragedy. But some neighbors still leave flowers at the back fence every spring. A quiet tribute to the woman who once lived there, who tried to fight back in her own way, and who, even after death, refused to be silenced.